Got it. Oh, thank you for whoever reminded me. Was that you, Joan?
Hmm.
Who was it? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start out with the history of hormone therapy, HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And believe it or not, it was first, oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Here's our agenda: the history of HRT, navigating healthcare. We're going to talk about providers, finding providers, interviewing providers. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about what's happening after this series. Then we'll go to our question answers and conversation. And then I have called it the after party. If anyone would like to stay on afterwards, from 8 o'clock on, I'm here to answer any questions. I'm here to talk about what I do as a nurse coach, a little bit about my services and the type of clients that I help and work with, and how that is all set up. So you're more than welcome to stay for the after party. I wish I could have something that I could virtually serve you, but I don't. So it'll just be an after party. Here we go. So as far back as the 1940s, we were using hormone replacement therapy. But first, let's talk about what was going on in the 40s and the 50s. The average income was $3,300 a year. The percent of people seeking four-year degrees were male, 7.3% of the population, and versus females at 5.2, which I was kind of surprised that it was that close, quite honestly, in 1940. But some of the majors were like home economics. So it was a different time. Some of the top songs were Bing Crosby, White Christmas was the top song of the 1940s. I couldn't play a Christmas song yet, but let me see if this will work. The top song in the decades of the 50s. Hold on, we're gonna see if this works. I don't think. Can you hear it? I love music. So that was the 50s. So here we were, that's what the era looked like, but here's where hormone replacement therapy was. Menopause was defined as a hormone deficiency. It was treated with a conjugated estrogen called Premarin. And Premarin was conjugated, means it's a chemical formulation from the urine of a mare, a female horse. So that's what Premarin was from, and that was the go-to as estrogen replacement. It was just Premarin, and it was from. Having said that, hormone replacement and therapies around menopause goes quite a ways back, but it was plant-based and the medicinal, like herbal medicines that were among the women. So I started from 1940 as a good spot because in, I believe it was 1943, the FDA approved the use of Premarin to treat hot flashes. That was it. They only approved it for the treatment of hot flashes. So in the 50s, Premarin continued to be the only thing used, and it wasn't widely used, and mostly it was because that era, women didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about their struggles. They may have talked about them with each other, but they never were going to go in and talk to a male doctor about it, or very rarely. It was the exception to the rule. So estrogen therapy was not widely used, but it was available in the 50s. We're going to go to the 60s and 70s. The average income in the 70s was $8,730. The percent between male and female was 14.1 versus 8.2. So it's like almost the gap is widening here, which I found very interesting. And then the song, wait for it. We got to play it. Hold on. Can you hear it? Hold on, it's coming. You can never not like the Monkees, ladies. And then wait, I did this for Lydia Helmsley, but I don't think she's here today. Come on, you know it. Little Dolly Parton, she started the empowerment of women with that 9 to 5. So that was the 80s, 1980. And where did we go? This became a big thing. In the 60s, there was a book that came out by a Dr. Robert Wilson. It was called Feminine Forever. And it was first based off of a paper he wrote for the American College of Physicians. And then he turned it into a book. And it was all about every woman should be on Premarin, 100%. It doesn't matter. Like no risk, no anything. That menopause is a hormone deficiency syndrome, and it should be treated across the board. And it also was a very much ignited the feminine movement. It was a best-selling book, and it started the ball rolling of the My Body, My Choice movement, which then led to Roe v. Wade. So, and all things around that female health, so women's health. So that was the 60s. And at that time, we only treated menopause with estrogen, with the Premarin, whether you had had a hysterectomy or not. And what was discovered quite early in the 70s and set hormone replacement therapy back was that unopposed estrogen, or Premarin only, in a woman with a uterus developed endometrial hyperplasia, which was a high risk for uterine cancer. So uterine cancer reared its head. It set back a little bit, but it was easily identifiable because the women that had hysterectomies and had zero side effects in that department. Obviously, they didn't have a uterus. So they were able to realize, let's counterbalance this with, because as we learned in our first episode of Menopause Moment, that estrogen and progesterone work hand in hand in the building up of the lining and then the sloughing of the lining. And so if you didn't have that alternative, that lining just got thicker, which then led, but you didn't have the progesterone and you were through menopause, so you weren't sloughing it. So it was an imbalance. They figured out and they corrected it, and they introduced the combination. Again, these are conjugated hormones. They are chemicals. Progesterone is purely synthetic. There is not a way, or was not a way at this time, to reproduce it or to produce something like this. So Premarin was from the horse's urine. It was a byproduct and a chemical component, and the progesterone was progestin, which is a synthetic. So we got back on track with hormone replacement therapy in the 60s and 70s, and there wasn't a whole lot of risk factors to look into because there wasn't a lot known about it. But they were seeing that it was super effective in managing hot flashes, super effective in managing vaginal atrophy, or that dryness and that painful sex. And it was effective initially, they thought, around cardiovascular disease, which brings us to the 80s. So right now, the FDA still has only approved hormone replacement therapy for hot flashes. So that's what you had to present with to get treatment. So in the 80s and 90s, the average income 1990 was $30,636. The 4-year degree, we're getting closer. We're evening that gap a little bit. Females with 4-year degrees are at 18.4%. And the songs were, hold on, you've got to love. I'm going to fast forward this a little bit. You can't get enough of Cher either, people. And wait for it, by the end of the 90s, nothing gets me pumped up like I Got a Feeling, okay? So just add some fun music and we can handle things, because the 80s and 90s got dicey. So in the 80s, the American College of Physicians developed the first guidelines toward when we should prescribe hormone replacement therapy. At that point, there wasn't a protocol. So they developed this, and all of a sudden the FDA said, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You can't have this protocol because we don't have any randomized clinical studies. We only have observational studies, which is more like we see people are doing well, they're feeling better, we'll keep using, but we hadn't ever done a true control where you have a placebo and you have the medication. So there was none of that. They did, though, in 1988, approve it for the use of, for the treatment of preventative osteoporosis, which was kind of like throwing them a bone. Really, physicians wanted a green light to say it was going to prevent cardiovascular disease or mitigate it. And so welcome to the 90s, early 90s, when NIH said, we will support the research around hormone replacement therapy as it relates to cardiovascular disease. The original goal of the now infamous Women's Health Initiative was not to determine the risk of breast cancer. It was to determine if hormone replacement therapy affected the long-term effects of cardiovascular disease, if it was able to mitigate it, if it was able to control it. So I'm not sure what you all know about the Women's Health Initiative, but it sure has been in the news a lot in the last several years. And I've done a lot of deep dives, and I'm going to caveat this. We're going to go into a little bit of it. First of all, hindsight is always 2020. We can look back at the thought process behind how they set this up and say they should have done this and they should have done that, and this is wrong and that is wrong. And whenever something comes out about how ill-advised the Women's Health Initiative was, or like how it wasn't run, I always go to their website and I want to hear their response. And their responses are succinct and they stand by that research. With the one caveat, every interview I've heard with anyone that was part of that will say, we didn't handle public relations properly at the time. So this is what this piece of the Women's Health Initiative did. It was started in like 1993. I don't think the research truly took off until 97. They had 68,000 participants. The average age is 59, is what the website will say, but everybody that on interviews will say it was closer to 67, so that's questionable. But basically 68,000 women from the age of 50 to 79 were in this study. And so as we know, most women go through menopause at 51. So if your average participant is at 59 or 60, they're almost 10 years out. So they're introducing hormone therapy to women that are almost 10 years out. So that's the one thing that is an issue. As I said, the goal was around hormone replacement therapy and cardiac health. They also, another odd thing, because when we do studies, we need to do the general population. We need to get our 68,000 participants and make them mimic the general population. The women in this study were asymptomatic participants. And the WHI's response to that, or their thinking on that, was because if we're giving placebo, if you're in the placebo group and you don't know that you're in the placebo group, if you're in the placebo group and you're symptomatic, you're going to drop out of the trial. And they wanted to control the dropout rate. Their second argument with the age of their participants is that they were trying to do this as condensedly as possible. There's only so much money to run this kind of a study over the course of 20 years, which would have been a better picture to start women in perimenopause and follow them through till 70 or 75. that's a long time to follow. That's a lot of money. So they wanted to see in a tight period. So they thought population, which we know now was not advantageous. 30 to 40% of the participants were smokers. Super interesting, because smoking, we know, is also a risk factor for cancer. It's a risk factor for heart disease. In addition, there was a high number of participants that were overweight, like 40% were overweight. So there were already some pretty big risk factors outside of hormone replacement. So now we're going to introduce hormones to women that have been through menopause for greater than, some of these women were 72, 73, 74, and they're introducing hormone therapy. So kind of an interesting, but so the group is, these 68,000 women are broken into two groups. There's the group with the uterus, and there's the group without the uterus. And within each of those groups, we split them in half. Half of them got the hormone replacement therapy, which was the conjugated estrogen and the synthetic progesterone, the MPA. At the time, bioidentical was on the scene, but it wasn't as readily available. It wasn't what everyone was using. So that's been another thing that they've defended. They defended the use of the conjugated estrogen. And really the outlier here is the MPA. That's what people think is the issue. So they have these two groups. The uterine women, the women with the uterus, used the two conjugated, and then half of them had the placebo, and then the other group without their uterus, they just did straight Premarin, horses, urine, or estrogen, okay? So what happened at the 4-year mark? What happened at the 4-year mark is that, five-year mark, I think, is that it was revealed that it was leaked. Actually, there was a leak to the media, and the media took it and ran, that hormone replacement therapy increases breast cancer 27%. That was the headline. And what you need to know is that there's ways, and if there's anyone, I didn't see Karen Brewer here. She's my chemist, and she, I'm sure, understands like research or sociology. Anybody that's done any research, there is the relative risk and there's the absolute risk, and you have to weigh both against each other, and you can't take one without the other. And so, in the group that received the women with the uterus that received the estrogen and the MPA, breast cancer went from 4 in 1,000 to 5 in 1,000. So that is your 25% roughly. But that's not how you should look at the statistic. You should look at the statistic that says 4 in 1,000 women will get breast cancer. And now we have one more, 1 in 1,000 is going to get breast cancer. You don't add it like that, according to people. I am just repeating what I have read. And so that number should have really been like 0.1% increase. But that was never able to be really unpacked once the word got out. The media took over and everything shut down. You will talk to gynecologists that remember the day that hit the Today Show, because every woman called their office and all things were shut down. Research was shut down. That research was shut down. Having said that, it did show preliminary that hormone replacement therapy did not seem to be effective in mitigating cardiovascular disease or heart disease. But look at our population. We have smokers and overweight people. Like, it may not have been a good population to study. So because of the Women's Health Initiative and the way it was handled in the PR realm, it set us back 15 years. Some people will say 20. but nothing was done, and no doctors will, and doctors have had a hard time getting back on board. Now, we have things like bioidentical hormones. We have compounding hormones. We have topical things. We know that the oral estrogen isn't always the best for menopausal. It's better because that has to be filtered through the liver and cause clotting issues, blood clots, embolus. But if we put it in a compound in a patch and it's absorbed into the skin, or it's vaginal and it's absorbed locally, far more effective. But the Women's Health Initiative, which is still going on, they still have studies. They have a very active website, and they are very diplomatic in their defense of why and what they did. And so, and I'm not here to point fingers. I am not a scientist. I am not a researcher. I'm just saying what the general public is. And I also, I'm going to put this caveat. I feel like we're in an all or nothing society where the pendulum swings from one to the other, and then somewhere at some point we settle in the middle, which is where I think we're going right now. So what are the types of hormone replacement therapy that are used now? We have implants like IUDs, and they have a very nuanced combination of estrogen and progesterone depending on how you tolerate progesterone. Some people don't tolerate it well. It makes them very agitated or terrible mood swings. And in that case, in an IUD, there's a light coating, and it's just a very small amount, and it's delivered locally. So there's IUDs, there's sprays, there's creams and gels. There are that you can use on your skin. You can use it on your vaginal area. There are oral hormone replacement therapies, although I think we're leaning toward the more topical, the more non-oral, I should say, for lack of a better word. There's skin patches, vaginal rings. That's something you put up almost like, think of like a diaphragm. It goes up and you can leave it in for 3 weeks at a time and then take it out. And that's a slow, localized hormone supplement or a health hormone. So here are the general go-to risk factors for menopausal hormone therapy. And I'm going to do a caveat, guys. This is just for educational purposes. This is a conversation you have with your provider. These are nuanced. Every person's different. Everyone has a different set of risk factors that will weigh differently. But these are the general overall things to think about when thinking about hormone replacement. So your timeline, so in the green light, which, you know, you're probably a good candidate and it's, you're not going to put yourself at risk. So if you're just newly menopausal, perimenopause, I think we're going to see a huge shift. I think we're going to start with education of women and physicians. We're going to start earlier introducing some hormone replacement therapy during perimenopause and then ease into menopause. If you're of normal weight, normal blood pressure, if you're otherwise healthy. And the atherosclerosis cardiovascular disease risk, that ASCVD, that is a formula that they have contrived, and you put in your weight and your blood pressure and your lipid levels, your triglycerides, HDLs and LDLs, and then any risk factors that maybe like, okay, you had a sibling die of a heart attack at age 35, or you had a parent that died of a heart attack before the age of 50, those sort of things. They put this all in. And if you are less than 5% and there's no breast cancer in your family, then you're a good candidate. So you all can read these. These are the things that you kind of can guide you on thinking about if this is something I want to look into, or if this is a conversation I have with my doctor. And with that segue, one of the things on my surveys was how do we find a good doctor? And one of the things I would love for this group to do is to develop a Google Doc where we all share, like, I've used this doctor and I had great luck, or this practice has a nurse practitioner, her name is this, and she's been super helpful. I'd not want to trash doctors on it. I would want to just relay the positive things that the providers, because providers are human beings. Providers have bad days, they have bad spells, they have lives, they're humans. And so they might go through a period where they're just not acting as their best self. So I would not want to tarnish their reputation. Instead, I just like to share the ones that we've had a good experience with. So I go to, how do I find a provider? Well, how do you find a mechanic? How do you find a plumber? How do you find a good childcare provider? How did you find a good college that you wanted to go to? You looked around, you asked questions, you went and visited. And so, like I say to some of my clients that complain about their providers, if your mechanic told you that your car is just going to stall at every other stop sign, that's just the way your car is, would you be like, okay, and just accept stalling out at every other stop sign? No, you would go find another mechanic. You'd talk to somebody, you'd ask your friend, like, who do you use? Who's a good mechanic? Because, so why wouldn't we do that with a OBGYN or any medical provider? I would look at their website. I would see what are they posting? What do they think is important? What's their messaging on there? I'd call their office and ask the questions. Sometimes the office staff is very telling about the feel in the office. I would not disrobe until you have spoken with that provider. Nowhere in any world do we, for the first time, maybe moving forward that changes it up, but in no world should we be in our pajamas talking to a stranger in their office sitting on, never, no. Like, I don't feel comfortable doing that, and I can't imagine most people do. So I would encourage you to say, please, we're going to have a conversation first, and then I'm happy to put this beautiful gown on. Trust your gut instinct. If you feel like you're being dismissed, trust that. Don't be satisfied. And then my last two things on this are the North American Menopause Society, which I've sent you to that website before, is a great site. Like I said, you can put the zip code in. If you're willing to drive, there are some providers. And they actually, I don't know how often it's updated, but I also discovered, because I get all this stuff into my feed on my, thank you, algorithms, MIDI Health. And I did a deep dive on MIDI Health. And it's been around for a while, maybe like 8 or 9 years, but it was only in California. But their whole thing is virtual health. Well, their whole thing is menopause, all things menopause, hormone replacement therapy, and other options if that's not a good fit for you. So they probably about 4 years ago, they got a $14 million feed for money, and now they are nationwide. And I looked it up, and you can be from New York State. They have services in New York State, and they accept Blue Cross Blue Shield, which I believe is the Hamilton Insurance. Somebody can say, yes, it is. You can go to their site and look. And I just, the minute
Correct,
I saw Blue Cross, it is, it's Blue Cross.
Yeah, Excel, yes.
Yes. So they take the insurance. I think when I saw that, because at first when I started to research this, I'm like, oh, it's in California. They're not in, like, we need something in upstate rural New York. We don't have a lot of options. But then they do. They are now in New York. They're in several states now, like a lot of them. And when I clicked on insurance is accepted, Blue Cross Blue Shield was there. So I was super excited about that, for that opportunity, or that it's telehealth. Now, they may require you to go somewhere and have a pap smear, because that's going to be protocol, obviously, every 2 years. But if you're looking for some alternative or some maybe more trained physicians, because let's see, is this my next slide? Yeah, I want to empower us today. And hold on a second, I am going to play a song, because this is my all-time anthem, ladies. Can you hear me? Do you know what it is? Name that tune. Can you hear it? Okay, I hope you heard that. That's an anthem. If you ever were in one of my spin classes, I made you sing that. And just as a side note, my daughter, who is just turned 24, she was home quarantining with a couple of her friends several years ago in college. And I made them listen to the song. Like, my kids all know it. They knew it before they went to kindergarten. It was just as important as tying their shoes. So, but these two young girls, they were like, we don't know this song. And I'm like, you will learn this before you leave, before this quarantine is over. And then fast forward like 3 months, she's in her apartment back at campus, and she's like, Mom, Catherine and Annie just crank that song all the time. And I'm like, because they should. So I want to be empowered by the numbers, ladies. The average income today is $67,521. The percent with a 4-year degree, male, 36.7, 9 million, versus female, 38.3, 12 million. Actually, the 9 million and the 12 million are enrolled as of 2021. They enrolled in college. So women are now outnumbering men enrolled in college, and they see that trend continuing. So we're going to bring them more educated, and with more education is going to demand more. So the music of the hour is Taylor Swift, as we all have probably heard. 6,000 women reach menopause every day. 73% of women aged 40 to 65 are not currently treating their symptoms. This is going to change. This next generation will not be this way. We are starting to change that. Only 20% of OBGYN residency programs provide menopause training. That's criminal, and that will change too, because there's an uproar. There's OBGYNs that are saying, we're not equipped, we can take care of the high risk pregnancy. I can deliver a premature child. I can take care of gestational diabetes. I can navigate uterine cancer or infertility, but I know nothing about menopause, when every one of their clients will go through it. So that's insane, and that will change. As a matter of fact, President Joe Biden just signed on Monday this women's health research. And what I know about it is that it's this initiative that in 45 days, he's got all of the health and medical government agencies have to file a report to him about where we are in women's health within 45 days. So then they can steer research and development and treatments for women, not research on an illness all based with men, and then we'll just lower the doses for a smaller woman, but truly women. So this is huge. I was super excited that I saw this, that I read about this, and that it happened just before this meeting, because what I want to know is, or what I want to let you know is that while menopause can be a struggle, it shouldn't be, and it won't be for long. And I'm hoping that we move forward on this. So what's next for the menopause moment? Here we are. So today is our third of 3. I had a really great response, so I'm super appreciative that I got so many of you to fill out that Google Doc. I appreciate it. And overwhelmingly, people want to see something continue. So I talked to Steph, and we're working out the details. But right now, it looks like the first Wednesday of the month, 7 p.m., we will continue this on menopause or women's health. It can be nuanced, but it will be me providing some sort of a educational piece, similar model, and then a question answer support. The first one will be 12/6, then 1/10, which is technically the second Wednesday, but we thought 1/3 was a little too early. So 1/10, and then 2/7 will be the third one, and then we'll take it from there. I want to share a Google Doc with provider recommendations for people, and maybe I'll look into how I can do it so that people can also say, hey, I did that Ember Wave and it works, or it didn't work for hot flashes, or I tried that MIDI Health and it was great, or it was a bust, or whatever. But maybe it can be this working doc that we can go-to for support. And I welcome any technical people's support or help on that. But I will start it going, and then please feel free to say, Maureen, you're not doing it the most effective way. We should do it like this. And then these are my resources that I use, although this is my Spotify playlist. I'm not sure how that made that on there, but and that's it. I open it up to questions and answers, but first I need to stop the recording. Wait, where do I see that pause recording? Stop recording. Okay.